am so proud and I feel privileged to introduce our speaker today, Council Member Robert White. A proud fifth generation Washingtonian, Robert C. White Jr. is in his second term as the at large member of the Council of the District of Columbia. He chaired the Council's Committee on Housing. Robert began his career in public service as a law clerk in the Maryland District Court for Montgomery County. For 5 years, he worked in the United States Congress, serving as legislative counsel to District Councilwoman Eleanor Holmes Norton. In 2014, he was tapped by the Attorney General Karl A. Racine to serve as the first director of community outreach for the DC Office of Attorney General. And in 2016, Robert was elected as an at-large council member with the highest number of votes in the history of DC's elected council. He was re-elected in 2020. Robert and his wife, Christy, an attorney with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, reside in Ward 4 with their daughters, Madison and Monroe, and rescue pit bull Roscoe. So don't mess with them. Okay, they attend St. Martin's Catholic Church, and Robert loves spending time with his family, and he loves reading, and he does one of the most dangerous things in the world, probably. I'm just playing. I think boxing was. He rides his motorcycle, so he really loves doing that too. And I am so proud, and like I said, to introduce Council Member Robert White.
First of all, thank you so much for having me. I am really excited to be here. I'm also relieved because Lisa invited me some time ago, and then I bumped into her at an event, still not having had the opportunity to be here. And I said, I cannot bump into Lisa again without making sure I got here. But I'm very excited to be with you. And Bob, thank you so much for your work with the Rotary and for your service and for allowing me to come join you. As Lisa mentioned, I am a council member, my dad, I'm a husband, but at the root of it, I'm just a DC guy. And right now, there's so much focus on national politics for reasons that we are all very aware of. And one of the things that I always wonder as a public servant, but also as a resident, a citizen, is why do people serve and what is their story and the connection between their story and the work that they do? And so what I want to talk to you about today is the connection between my story and what I do, because that connection is very tight and it's very important to me. So I grew up in DC. I'm a fifth generation Washingtonian, and I grew up in a way that is very typical of many families, especially Black families in DC in the 80s and 90s. I grew up in a family that at that point had no college graduates. We grew up in a way and in a time where we always found a way to make ends meet, but there was never quite enough for those ends to meet. And so it was a constant struggle that meant moving around, that meant sometimes some bills got paid late, but you always figured it out. Now, as typical as my experience was growing up in my early years, my life took a very atypical turn that impacted me significantly when I was 8. When I was 8, I was a mama's boy, as many of us are, but I was a mama's boy who lost his mom to breast cancer at an age that was too young for her and too young for me. And fate being what it was, 3 weeks after that, on my way to school, I was in a near fatal car accident where, believe it or not, a car managed to land on top of the car that I was in. It split my skull, collapsed my mouth. I was medevaced to the hospital. I fell way behind in school in 3rd grade. So before the car accident, we were writing in print. We were doing addition and subtraction. By the time I got back to school, my peers had started on cursive, multiplication, and division, and I just could not catch up. And I failed the 3rd grade. I failed the 4th grade, 5th grade, every single grade until my junior year in high school. Now, as difficult as those experiences were, they taught me resilience and the importance of hard work. And those experiences and the experiences after that taught me a great deal of lessons that I bring to my work every day. So as I would get to school now with a single father who worked an hourly wage job, I remember very vividly many times my dad pulling his car in front of the Metro bus, so because we were always running late, and digging through the ashtray for, we're all old enough to know what was in the ashtray when you didn't smoke. It was change. Thank you. Change. Enough change for the bus. And sometimes we had it, and sometimes we just had to hope for the grace of a kind bus driver who would cut us a little slack. Now, like a lot of young people, and I'm the dad of an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old now, so I see this emerging in them. I cared about what I looked like. I would, how I dressed, wanted to hang out with my friends, but we didn't have that money. My clothes came from Goodwill. My dad said, son, if you want clothes that don't come from Goodwill, then you're going to have to buy them. So in the 7th grade, I found somebody who would pay me to work. The barbershop on First and Kennedy Street said, look, if you want to sweep floors, you can take the tips. So I started working in 7th grade, and I've worked ever since. And I remember my first day, my dad dropped me off at about 8 a.m. and picked me up at 7 p.m. And when he picked me up, it was fall, so it was starting to get dark already. He picked me up and he said, how'd your first day go? And I was disappointed. I said, I only made $13. And that was a long day to make $13. My dad said, I'm really proud of you because you earned that. And that was really the foundation of my work ethic. But watching my dad dig through the ashtray of his car for change for us to take, my brother and I, to take the bus, from having to earn $13 on an 11-hour workday, it taught me the importance and the value of every single dollar. So one of the things that frustrates me as an elected official and as a taxpayer is I'm looking at a city that has had more money every single year for 24 consecutive years. And yet every single year, we're talking about a budget crunch. We're talking about what we can't fund for schools, what we can't fund for housing, what we can't fund for safety nets. And I know what my life would be and the lives of many other people without those safety nets. And I insist that we have to be able to do better. So one of the things I do in my work, and my legislative director, Katie Whitehouse, who is absolutely phenomenal, what we've done is we started instituting fiscal discipline in the city that in other states usually comes from the governor. But seeing the lack of focus, the lack of metrics, the lack of clear priorities, we said we've got to do better. So we started looking in the jurisdiction of the committee that I chair and the parts of government that I know. And I started seeing these inefficiencies that add up to millions of dollars. And these are just the things that I can see. But I know that looking across a $22 billion government, if I can find millions of dollars in inefficiencies in the little bit that I'm looking at, I know that if we really take a fine-tooth comb through everything that we do and say, what is the effectiveness? Is the reason that we created this program still in existence? Are there better ways that we can do some of the work that we're doing with not just the same outcomes, but better outcomes by looking at other states, by looking at the private sector? Then we could do a lot more for the people who need it with the amount of money that we already have. So we are in the process of instituting historic fiscal disciplines, pulling from the best work that has been done around the country and the top talent in our jurisdiction. But then I look at what separates me today from the rest of my family. I'm still the only college graduate in my family. And my life, my existence is very different than everybody else's in my family. And it's not because I'm smarter. I'm just not by a long shot the smartest person in my family. The difference is education. I've been able to go to college, go to law school, and I think about that opportunity. But I also think about it in a really unique way. This probably won't surprise you, but when you fail every single grade from 3rd grade until your junior year of high school, people will count you out. And people counted me out early. Many of the people who should have been pushing me, propelling me, encouraging me were the ones telling me that I would not succeed, including my guidance counselor in the 10th grade who told me I would not go to college. Now, 4 years after she told me that, I was halfway through college and on my way to Oxford University. But I got to tell you, that kick in the gut is one that I will never forget. And it's that experience that makes me look around the city at young people, knowing, one, that I am not phenomenally talented in any way, but two, that I have been able to do some phenomenal things because of the opportunity that education provided me. It insists that I owe something to the young people in our city to make sure they have the opportunity to reach their highest potential. Now that means, thank you. That means, one, that we have to encourage these young people. We have to pour into these young people. But two, it means we have to offer them the opportunity to find their talents, even if it is not the type of talent that would register on a test or even necessarily in a traditional classroom. So one of the things that Katie Whitehouse and I focus on a lot right now is the biggest expansion of vocational education that we have ever had in our city. I think a lot about my grandfather. Without the work that he did to move his family from Southeast to Northwest, and then to buy a house, which is the only other home that a member of my family lives in the city other than mine. My grandfather did that working 2 jobs as a delivery man. He was able to provide for his family. Now, even if young people in our city are not going to college, which many of them will not do, that does not mean that they can't provide for their families or be a foundation for the next generation of their families. But we have to create that opportunity, which exists not just in the classroom and going to college, but also for people who want to work with their hands. But it also goes deeper than that, because we spend a lot of time listening to young people about what they need. And one of the things that young people are telling us right now is that they need more guidance. Now, when young people have the presence of mind to tell you consistently that they need more guidance, then we adults have got to listen. So Katie and I are right now working to create a cadre of mentors and tutors across the government, starting with the lowest hanging fruit. There are 24,000 DC government employees. We have a bill that would get every single one of those employees an hour a week paid to mentor or tutor a young person in our city. So 80s and 90s in DC. I'm not calling out any ages, but I'm saying I think most of us who were in DC or reading the news anywhere in the country or the world knew what DC was like in the 80s and 90s. We were known as the murder capital of the United States. It was a very violent time. Now, I remember being 10 years old at my neighborhood playground, which was Upshur Playground, and seeing the first drive-by shooting that I'd ever seen. I left the basketball court where I was playing, and I saw a kid that I knew from the neighborhood. I didn't know him well. I just knew him from around the neighborhood, who lay dead next to a tree. And I saw as his mom walked up to that scene and saw her son laying there. Now, that impacted me as a 10-year-old in a way that I'm probably still haven't unpacked to this day. But one of the things I have unpacked is that I'm a father of a 5 and 8-year-old. And just a few years ago, when my youngest was in daycare on Kennedy Street, about 4 blocks from where I used to sweep floors, we one day got an email from the daycare that said the kids can't play outside anymore because of the number of daytime shootings. And that's not the message that any parent wants. But I know that message is better than the message that mother got when she walked up to that crime scene that I saw when I was 10 years old. And it makes me think about the impact on children like mine, the impact on parents like that mother, and the need to solve the issue of violence in our city. Now, solving it doesn't mean just throwing out your best random idea. It doesn't mean playing on the fears of people who are rightfully scared in our city in a time where we're seeing more gun violence than we have since the 90s. It means figuring out what is really happening and how we really solve those problems. And sometimes the real answers are not the splashy ones, are not the sexy ones, but they are the ones that can fix what's happening. So right now, if you saw a crime happening and you picked up your phone and called 911 here in DC, there is a good chance that you won't get an answer because our 911 call system is broken, which means whoever's committing that crime If somebody else didn't report it, if the police didn't happen to be there, the police never get there and there's no accountability, right? If the police do get there and arrest someone, the folks who collect and analyze the evidence for prosecutions in DC's crime lab, unfortunately, is another broken agency here in DC. So broken that it lost accreditation for multiple years, and prosecutors have had to, for years, pick and choose which evidence they're going to send to outside labs. Now, this becomes a budget issue, right? Send to outside labs in order to prosecute, which means there is less accountability. So what I hear from a lot of elected officials, and it filters down to residents because it sounds right, we need more laws, we need harsher sentences, we need to be harsher on juveniles. But those aren't the broken issues in our system. We have a lot of laws. Like everything that you're seeing in the city is already illegal. These drug-free zones, crazy to me, because the whole city is a drug-free zone. It is already illegal to deal drugs in the city everywhere, right? So we start to analyze these things from the perspective of a parent, from the perspective of a child who grew up seeing this level of violence. And you have to realize that you have to actually understand these issues in order to solve them, which comes to an issue of accountability, which is a broken government agencies, not a lack of sentences that, they aren't harsh enough. But it is also making sure young people have opportunity. Because if we have a school system that drives all of our young people to college, and sophomores and juniors are saying, well, look at my grades, I don't plan on going to college, they start to ask why they're even in the classroom. And that is a dangerous question. So we have to get in front of that. We have to fix the systems. We also have to make sure we're creating the right opportunity for our young people. The last thing I will say, because I do want to leave a little bit of time for questions, if that's permissible, is what all this comes to. And there's a lot of other work that we've done. And let me give one example, because all this means going underneath the issues. When I walk around the city as the chair of the housing committee, and I talk to unhoused people, and unfortunately there are a lot of them, and my team and I take time out to talk to folks. There are a couple things I realized. One hurts me deep in my gut is that almost everybody I talk to is a Black native Washingtonian. When I hear the stories, what I find is that they hit a point in their lives where they needed a safety net that didn't exist. And I think about what would happen if I didn't have a safety net at the times in life that I needed it. But the other thing I find out that is maybe more discouraging is that almost every homeless person I talk to in DC has already been approved for a housing voucher, and we've already funded the housing voucher. The reason folks are still living on the street instead of in a house with that voucher is because we don't have enough social workers, and that is the key person that helps unhoused folks find and get to all the resources. But also, as I look in our schools, we have a tremendous number of vacancies in school mental health professionals, because we don't have enough mental health professionals, be them social workers or others. So again, you can't stop at the problem. We in the government, you have an opportunity, you got to solve problems. If you have a pipeline issue, then you have to open up the pipeline. So I worked with the University of the District of Columbia and created a free master's in social work program for all DC residents so we can open up the pipeline. All this to say, from the perspective of somebody who grew up in DC in a family that is very typical of many DC families, seeing many of the same issues now, in my family and across the city that I saw then, but also being a dad who knows that my girls today and, years from now are going to scrutinize my work and say, Dad, what did you do with that time you had? And I think in public service, you can do one of three things. You can spend that time doing the wrong thing, being self-interested. You can waste that time because you wanted a title, and so you're going to take up space and not get anything done. And I don't know which of those two things is worse. Or you can spend that time moving the ball forward even just a little bit so that the folks who come behind you have more opportunities and so that the city is better. Now, I believe that government must solve problems. I also believe that government can solve problems, but that means that we cannot allow ourselves to just stop at those problems. And whether it is lived experience that pushes you to make sure you are actually solving problems, or just the notion that people elected you to solve problems and you feel like you can't like sleep at night unless you actually do the thing that they elected you to do, the thing you said you were going to do, whatever drives you to actually solve problems is something that we have to hold elected officials accountable for. And so as I'm gonna wrap up the same way I started, looking at the federal folks. One, I got to tell you, the reason I left Capitol Hill is because I had so many nights where I'm working till 2, 3 in the morning on amendments that I knew weren't going to pass because they would never get examined on their merits. They would be bogged down in politics, as everything in Capitol Hill does. And two, Congress just doesn't do a lot. They do not pass a lot of bills. And I'm not big on wasting time. Yeah, I got one life. I wanted to make a difference. But I think about, from the federal perspective, the impact that this next election will have on DC specifically. So there are a number of powers that a president has without any additional authority from Congress, including the power to take over our police force, and the power to deploy the DC National Guard. That's just the tip of the iceberg. But there are other things that the president could do with the support of Congress. They could completely roll back home rule. Because we have home rule because of a bill passed by Congress that they could repeal. And so our elected mayor, our elected council, our elected attorney general could cease to exist. And this is a time where folks are not, and look, both parties acting in all ways in the best interests of the people that they represent, but being driven too often by power in politics. And we need to be thoughtful about, one, who gets elected, but two, the folks that we are electing to the national scene, because what they do with their time matters as much as what we do in local government. And we need to have people who are driven by the right reasons and driven to do the right thing. So again, I want to thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to people about my work, about why I do the work, and frankly, to try to raise the bar for accountability, hoping that I'm going to be measured by that same bar, but everybody's going to be measured by that bar. Because we can do some phenomenal things, but only if we have the right people in elective office.
Hi, Sheldon Ray, longtime DC resident. You may not have the answer to this, but do you have any idea how much of Netanyahu's security tab the city has to pay for? The Watergate Hotel where he lives, I live at the Watergate, is a fortress. It's like a Berlin Wall went up overnight. Yep. Half of MPD is there, it seems like. I've never seen anything like it in my life. Sure. Not even for a U.S. incoming president at an inauguration. It's scary.
It is scary. I made the mistake of trying to get crabs from the wharf on Sunday. It beat me on the way down and the way home because I went home. I thought I'd avoid the downtown closures. I went home through the park and met those gates. I don't know the final. We won't know the final tab for some time. But security for the federal presence is provided primarily by the Metropolitan Police Department. The city gets reimbursed, but one, we often get reimbursed late. We have to fight for the reimbursement, and sometimes we don't get reimbursed the same cost. And so whether it's Netanyahu coming to visit an inauguration or just the president moving around town, this costs DC taxpayers.
Okay, thank you, Robert. Great seeing you. Oh, God, not seeing you. I can't see. Great hearing you. I think I want to let my fellow Rotarians know that I've known you for years. Yeah. When you work with, because I was in your office all the time.
That's right.
When you work with Eleanor Holmes.
Yeah.
So we go back in. So you know what my commitment is. I'd also like my fellow Rotarians to know, and especially my Peace Initiative Committee, that I talked to you a few minutes this morning, and that you have agreed to sponsor a day for Judge Mary Terrell.
Yes.
All right. So I'd like to thank you for that.
Absolutely.
All right. And then, yes.
Kenny's a politician. You see how he put that on the record to make sure. I love
That's
it.
right. That's right. It's on the record now. And my club knows it. And then, with all this violence going on, and with our peace initiative, and I don't know if you remember, Robert, You know, my organization was called Root. What meant we need to get to the root of the problem. What's causing these issues? And you mentioned that. A couple of things in the district. Do we have a comprehensive approach other than police locking people up? Do we have it yet in this city? It seems like everything is depending on development. Okay, and I'm wondering, do we have yet a comprehensive approach where all city council and government agencies get together and work on these issues?
Kenny asks if we have a comprehensive approach on public safety and specifically whether the council and the mayor work together on it. I wish I could say yes, Kenny. This is a level of focus and clarity that I'm trying to push DC government to. I believe that the key priorities should be set by the mayor. And that the mayor, any chief executive, should invite the legislative branch to help fill in the gaps between where you are and get into those key priorities. That way you have everybody moving in the same direction, and you have politicians not fighting for credit, but working together. The mayor has not set clear priorities, and there's been a lot of resistance to my great frustration around, one, setting priorities, and two, key metrics, because I want to know if the things that we're doing are working. I think we have to be focused on employment opportunities. We have to be focused on mental health. We have to be focused on evaluating how our violence intervention programs are working and how we can improve them. Because while I believe that violence interrupters are an important part of a public safety ecosystem, I also know for a fact that some of the groups do better than others, and you've got to learn from the folks who are doing the best so that we're constantly improving. But I think until we have in our city clear articulated priorities and we stop resisting metrics, we're going to see ourselves going in circles. So I'm really glad to tell you crime is going down right now. Violent crime is going down. But there are two problems with that. One, it doesn't feel like it, and that matters. And two, it's going down for reasons that people can't articulate because we don't have an active strategy going. So I think we can do a lot better there. Kenny, I'm going to keep working to play my part, and I think a lot of folks in DC government are willing to play their part. Thank you.
Hi. My question is, what made you turn around in your junior year? Because the conventional wisdom would be somebody like your record would say we've lost them.
I'm glad you asked that because it was something I wanted to mention here that I forgot. But in the 9th grade, I believed that I could turn things around. But I had a reputation, and the reputation would usually defeat me before I could show any progress. In the 10th grade, I started working to turn it around, but I didn't really know how. I was not a successful student, and I was being really bogged down by the teachers and guidance counselors who were supposed to support me. But I learned something really important in 9th and 10th grade, which was that I was a good writer. And once I realized I was good at something, you couldn't convince me that I was bad at everything. My sophomore year, I randomly entered a speech competition hosted by the Rotary Club, which I believe was this one.
All right.
And I wasn't the star student at my school, so I didn't have all the help from the school that I could have had. But one of the Rotary Club members, even though I didn't win, said, "You should keep doing this. You're actually really good at it." And I really appreciated it. It was at the Hotel Washington was where they held it. There it is. And I was still a failing student at that time, but it gave me a boost. And I don't know who that person was and the members of the club at that time, but I'm grateful for it. The other thing is I needed a change of scenery. And so my dad knows now, but I withdrew from the school I was at, and I forged my dad's signature on a transfer application, and I got myself a fresh start.
Thank you, council member, for coming today. You spoke about inefficiencies. You also spoke about our existence here. We are a disenfranchised federal territory. Yeah. You talked about electing people that would help us. Other than a blue wave and the election of a Democratic president and maybe 60 Democratic senators and a Democratic House, what can we do, and what specifically can you do as one of our most prominent leaders to be thoughtful, that's your word, and to help us advance and become fully enfranchised and have access to Article 1?
David, I appreciate that question. There are a couple things that I can do and that we can do. One of the things that I'm going to do is I'm going to work to mobilize DC residents who have a particular vulnerability in this election to be involved in other states, in swing states. So I'm going to be knocking on doors in other states, and I'm going to use my platform to galvanize other DC residents to do that. So if anybody becomes interested, please let me know. The other thing that we have to do is continue to engage other members of Congress from both parties because look, if we're honest with ourselves, the time the district got the closest, not to full enfranchisement, but to one vote in the House, no senators, no statehood, one vote in the House, we had a Democratic president, a Democratic House, and a Democratic Senate, and we still couldn't get it done. All right. And so there's a level of accountability that we have to hold even our friends to. And, I think that often we don't want to criticize, DC is overwhelmingly Democratic. So we can get a little quiet about disagreements when we disagree with the president and it's a Democrat. I don't think that's the right approach. Because I think DC gets taken advantage of by Democrats and Republicans. I think, more by Republicans, but both parties do it. And I think we've got to start to hold folks accountable. And accountability means, one, speaking up, even when it's our friends. It means knocking on doors in other states. And it may mean funding opposition elections to folks who step on DC home rule.
Thank you. We have an online question from past President Jennifer Hara. Jennifer, you want to?
Hi, thank you, Steve. Hi, Robert. Good to see you. Again, apologies for not being able to be there with you in person. And I'm so glad that past President Lisa was able to get you to come address the club. I know you are currently up for re-election and your seat is at large, but, and not to put you on the spot, are you going to run for mayor again?
I don't know how just because you say I don't mean to put you on the spot, it doesn't mean you didn't put me on the spot. So I'll say this, Jennifer, I don't like cagey politicians. I can't unsee the vision that I have for DC. I believe that DC can have the best and brightest leadership across the heads of all agencies, that developing and promoting good leadership up and down agencies is something that should be a core tenet of leadership, that we have to set key priorities for our city, metrics so that people can hold us accountable and get excited about a future that is good for all of us in DC. In addition to that, my wife has already said she would support me in running for mayor again. So in 2 years, I'll give you a more definitive answer, but right now I think that's where we're going to move.
Mr. Councilman, in the late words of the great Tip O'Neill, all politics are local. You're a local councilman here. So I'm going to keep this question local for you and your staff person to take back to the office. All of us get our food delivered, but young men and women that are driving these motor scooters, etc., to deliver food to our house. I saw one hit by a car the other day. How horrible that was. What are we doing from the council, the mayor's office, to direct to the companies that employ? And first of all, I want you to know, I'm very thankful that they have jobs because they need those jobs. And I support that greatly. I have no problem with that. But what are we doing to communicate with the companies that do the employment, that they must have a greater training between the DC police and them, and how they react, because it's very dangerous driving. We know it's already dangerous driving in the District of Columbia. In fact, coming from West LA, it's worse here.
Yeah.
Everybody jokes about the traffic in Los Angeles, but let me tell you, one has to keep total in charge of their driving, what they're doing. So if you could just get a message to them, if the people behind the companies that employ, that they need training, get the police to talk to them and let them know it's their life that's is equally as important as those of us that live here in the district?
I'll just answer briefly. Yes, I will reach out to the companies. Like everybody else who drives in DC, I am definitely afraid that I'm going to hit one of these scooter drivers. I like the work they're doing, but they do have to follow the law for their safety, for the safety of others. So one, we have to make sure we are doing enforcement. But the idea of reaching out to the companies, I'm going to do that.
Mr. Council Member, let folks know how you're now working with landlords. You're on a listening tour with landlords because the legislation is so heavy on the tenant side. The landlords have been really going through hell with trying to provide housing. And me as a landlord to a voucher family, you and I, we communicated when I shared with you how my unit was destroyed, and yet I still hang in there and try to provide affordable housing for citizens in DC. But let the public know what you're doing to listen to us landlords for a change.
I appreciate that. So often in politics, folks get lost in the narrative, or they don't spend the time to overcome the narrative to understand what's happening. The narrative is that landlords are terrible people. And folks who and tenants are always great. That's not the reality. The reality is I come from a family. So my grandfather bought our house in Northwest in 1963. They had 5 kids. None of those kids owned a home in DC. So I grew up as a renter, right? You can't be a renter unless somebody's going to rent to you. And then there are a lot of folks in our city, because the cost of housing has gone up so much quicker than wages. There are a lot of people who can't rent without a voucher or some type of assistance. Well, the more landlords feel like they're stuck on the hook if their property gets destroyed, if they can't evict when they need to, the fewer folks who are going to be willing to rent to people with vouchers. That is a problem. So we have to overcome the narrative. We have to make sure the scale shouldn't be tilted to one side or the other. It should be fair for everybody. So as chair of the housing committee, I've made it a point to listen. I very much listen to tenants, but I listen to landlords as well, and try to make sure that we are taking all of this into account in our regulations and giving even the big bad landlords the resources they need. And I've been helped by a new director of DC Public Housing Agency, which plays a large role in our vouchers. I worked really hard to usher in a dynamic change in that agency, full retooling of their board because the board wasn't getting anything done, and then a complete turnover of the executive leadership because the previous leadership could not turn around the agency. So now we have an executive director who is listening to residents, who is listening to landlords. I'm making sure that we do that from the housing committee as well. And we're starting to see a change, but you're not going to get to that change without listening to folks. So I appreciate you speaking up because it's not always easy to do. Yes, you have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilmember White. Terrific. You have my vote. Don't sit down yet. And I live in Maryland. I'll vote twice. So we have a tradition in our club of planting a tree in the honor of our speakers. So we will plant a tree in your honor.
That's amazing.
It'll be in your name, and you will get the coordinates, the GPS coordinates of where this tree is planted.
I will visit it.
And here's the certificate for that tree planting. And here's a pin to wear as well.